Have you ever finished a coloring page, looked at it and thought, something is missing? Or maybe even worse, I completely ruined it. I've been there many times, but over the last few years, one art supply has saved more of my coloring pages than anything else. Not colored pencils, not markers, but oil pastels. Today I want to show you 6 ways and tips how I use my oil pastels, and there will be a bonus at the end as well. Over time I started to use oil pastels more and more often, and honestly, now I can't even imagine not having oil pastels in my collection and in my art studio. Just look at all these pages, they wouldn't exist without oil pastels. But before we jump into the life-saving oil pastel hacks, let's take a closer look at this beautiful set of 77 colors from Lightwish, and let's swatch them so we can see all the beautiful colors this floral set offers. Inside the box, there are 3 separate compartments with 26 colors in each one. Even with so many colors inside, the box doesn't take up too much space, and I think it could be quite comfortable to take it with you to do some outside painting. Also, the advantage is that the box is sturdy, so I think it can protect the oil pastels quite well. I already own another oil pastel set from Lightwish, and I have always been very happy with how they perform, so I knew this set was gonna be great as well. Even though it's called a floral set, don't let the name limit you. It has so many beautiful colors that you can use not only for flowers, but also for skies, fantasy scenes, glowing effects, dramatic backgrounds, and basically whatever you want to create. Swatching is one of the most important things I recommend doing before you start using any new art supply. It doesn't matter whether it's colored pencils, markers, paints, or oil pastels, because when we swatch a new medium, we are not only looking at the colors, we are also getting to know how the medium behaves. We can feel whether the pencils or pastels are soft or firm, how easily they apply, how strong the pigments are, and whether they blend well. It gives us a much better idea of what to expect before we start using the medium on an actual coloring page. The swatch book I am using today is also from Lightwish, and with 100% cotton paper, you can use really any medium you want. It also has transparent protective sheets between the pages, which is especially useful for oil pastels, where the swatches stay protected and you can still see the colors through the transparent sheet. For today's demonstrations, I will be working with 2 different coloring pages. The first one is from the coloring book Anime Manga Girls by Mei Yu, and I will use this page to demonstrate most of the techniques and hacks. But I'm also going to work on another page in a coloring book I usually don't color in, but since I'm using a floral set, I decided to grab World of Flowers by Johanna Basford. On this page, I actually used oil pastels for the entire page, except the bug's legs, which I did with pencils because they are really tiny. And why did I choose the page in Mei Yu's coloring book? Because it's all messed up. If I remember well, I used it as a testing page for soft pastels, some stencils, and even a gold metallic pen. But what I didn't know before, I created a perfect page for this video, because I also want to show you that oil pastels can help to save actually any page. No matter what you already created on the page or if it has Amazon paper, because oil pastels can work on top of everything. Here is an example coloring page from the coloring book Worlds Within Worlds by Kirby Rosanes, where I completely changed already finished coloring page, which I didn't like, because first I used black acrylic paint for the background, which back then I thought it will be great, but I didn't like it and I actually didn't know how to fix it because acrylic paints are not my favorite art medium, so I didn't want to use them anymore. And any other art media, they actually don't work well on top of acrylic paints. But oil pastels, they worked just perfectly and I created completely new world on this page. Now, let's start with the first hack, blending. It's actually a technique, but there are some hacks that help to make the blending smooth, effortless, and really magical. I have been using oil pastels for around 2 years now, and during that time I have tried many different blending tools and methods, but in the end I discovered that the two most effective tools are actually very simple. I always had the best results when I used the oil pastels themselves and my fingers. However, it's also important to look at the softness of the oil pastels. The softer the oil pastel is, the easier it will be to blend the colors. With Lightwish oil pastels, this isn't a problem at all. And as you can see in this demonstration, they are very creamy, so the colors move and blend together really nicely. I start by applying the colors next to each other. And now the trick is in going back and forth with all the colors. Of course, we don't have to create a perfectly smooth blend immediately. Just place the colors next to each other, overlap them, and slowly build the transition. After that, I use my fingers to smooth everything out. You don't have to put hard pressure on your fingers, because we already blended the colors together when we were overlapping them and when we went going back and forth. So now we can use fingers really just to smooth everything. And of course, I am using all my fingers. It's good to keep your fingers clean, especially when you move from dark to light colors, but you don't necessarily have to change fingers after every single color. Often, you can use the same finger to blend almost everything because you are moving from one color into another, and not switching your fingers after every color will actually help to create more natural transitions and blending. Sometimes I also use a blending stick, but only for smaller areas when I need to get into really tiny corners, but I don't like to use it for large backgrounds, as it has never created the same smooth, soft finish that I can achieve with the oil pastels themselves and my fingers. Once the first layer is blended, we can start building on top of it. And that brings us to second hack, technique, and it's layering. Layering is probably the second most used technique I use when working with oil pastels. On this page, I mainly used layering to create the clouds, and no, I didn't seal the first layer before doing this. I just took the white oil pastel and applied it directly over the colored background, and then I used my finger to soften the white and make the clouds look fluffy and slightly disappear into the background. Of course, clouds don't have to be white. If you are creating something more dramatic, you can use red, orange, yellow, pink, purple, or any other color that fits your scene. On another page from a coloring book by Hanna, I used a mix of dark blue, reds, black, and yellows to create much more dramatic clouds. On this bird page, I used a palette knife to help create this type of clouds. It's a very simple technique, but it can create really interesting texture and movement. I already have more detailed tutorial about using a palette knife with oil pastels, along with other coloring tutorials and color alongs, full versions of my YouTube coloring videos, and you can find all of these on my Patreon Nekosimi Coloring. And of course, both pages I'm using today will also be available on my Patreon. The third hack is probably one that not many people know about, but I really like to use it. It's actually using colored pencils over oil pastels. I know that it may sound strange, because oil pastels are very thick, creamy and oily, but this combination can work surprisingly well. I use color pencils over oil pastels when I want to define edges, bring back small details, or correct the area where I accidentally went over the line and went into the area where I don't really want to have oil pastels. Important is to mention that it works best with wax-based oil pastels, such as Prismacolor, Luminance, or Lightfast. Another cool reason oil pastels can be such a great rescue tool is that they can cover marks that colored pencils simply can't. In this illustration, I had marks from the pen on the girl's skin. I tried covering them with colored pencils, but of course, pen is just too strong for pencils, especially for light skin colors. However, oil pastels helped me to cover it very easily. Because they are creamier and more opaque than colored pencils, I could apply a skin tone oil pastel over the pen marks and gently blend it into the surrounding area. The fifth trick is covering the outlines of the illustration. This is something I really love to do because it gives the illustration a sense of realism, and I usually do this step at the end when I'm almost finished. On this page, you can see me applying light blue, dark blue, and white oil pastel around and over the hair, but I'm not covering the hair entirely. I'm using the edge of the oil pastel to create a thin layer over the outline, and of course, if one side of the oil pastel becomes too rounded, you can just turn it over and use the other side of the pastel. After applying the pastel, I gently smudge it with my finger, and if I lose too much darkness or definition, I simply go back with colored pencils and use them on top of the oil pastels, just like we talked about in the previous hack. The last time I used this technique was actually in a coloring book by Hanna Karlzon, and I used it on this flag page. I applied the oil pastel around the edges of the flags, which helped soften the edges and create more natural effect. It's quite a small step, but it can make a surprisingly big difference. And as you can see, you can use it basically on any illustration. The sixth hack is perfect for magical and fantasy coloring pages. Just like the previous hack, I usually do this at the end of the coloring. It's quite similar to the layering and softening the outlines techniques, but this time we are placing the pastel around the object instead over its edges. And then again, you simply use your finger to smudge the oil pastel in whatever direction you want. You can always go in one direction, or you can experiment with different directions. My favorite color for a glow is yellow, but it works with other colors as well. Again, it depends on the color palette you are using and on your preferences. Now to the bonus everyone is waiting for. I want to talk about something I'm being asked about very often, and it's how to protect and seal your oil pastel pages. There are several different options, and it depends on your preferences and your goals with the page. If you really want to protect your page, and it doesn't have to be only a coloring page, but your own work as well, and if it's something that you want to really protect, maybe display on the wall or give it to someone, I recommend to use proper varnish or fixative that can really create a protective layer on your work. One such product I use is the Oil Pastel Varnish by Royal Talents. It's a white liquid that you apply with a brush, but don't worry, it's transparent after drying. However, because you have to use a brush to spread the liquid all around the page, it can leave brush marks, and it can also smudge the oil pastels a little bit. Another option is to use spray fixative. My favorite is from brand Sennelier because it works amazingly. It creates transparent and even layer. However, if you want to seal really thick layer of the oil pastels, it may not be that well effective, or you may need to use more layers. On the other hand, if you don't need the highest protection and you just want to touch the page without the oil pastels being smudged, then you can use some of these next products. The first I am using is satin glazing liquid from the brand Golden. It's actually a slow drying extender for acrylic paints, but it can also help to prevent oil pastels from smudging. This particular type creates matte finish, so you will have no reflections on the dried page. However, it can make the colors slightly dull. And that's why I am now trying the soft gel semi-gloss from the brand Golden as well, instead of glazing liquid, which is also an acrylic medium, but so far I have the impression that it creates a little bit firmer layer than the glazing liquid. And also it's semi-gloss, so it isn't completely matte, but it also doesn't make the page extremely shiny, and personally I like this effect the most. However, no matter which product I use, especially when there is another illustration on the opposite side of the book, or if I do a double page, I always place a parchment paper or baking paper between the pages, because even if you use the varnish or some other protective layer, you may risk that the pages will stick to each other, especially if you worked on the double page. Even if you don't seal the pages with anything, just placing the parchment paper between the pages can be enough to prevent oil pastels from smudging. Well, as you can see, oil pastels are much more than just another art supply. They can help you create smooth backgrounds, dramatic clouds, soft edges, magical glowing effects, and completely new atmospheres. But more importantly, they can give a second chance to a page that you thought is already lost. And that's probably why I love using oil pastels so much. They give me the freedom to experiment, because I know that even if something doesn't work, I may still be able to cover it, change it, or just turn it into something completely different. I hope these hacks gave you some new ideas and maybe inspired you to try oil pastels in your own coloring books. Have a meow someday, and I will see you in the next video. Bye bye!